Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name's Amanda and this is a vlog of my late autism and ADHD diagnosis experience. First off, because I really hate it when creators wear shirts that have words on them, but then you can't read the message. Drives me crazy and I didn't feel like changing, so I'm just going to go ahead and show you what my shirt says. It says, "I'm not aspiring to be humble." I absolutely love it. It was a quote that Kamala said in an interview, and it healed parts of me that I didn't even know needed healing. That's not what this video is about, but it does relate to autism, so I'm going to talk about it just for a couple seconds here. And it's because growing up, since I was undiagnosed autistic, things that were really hard for me weren't hard for other people. And when I was able to accomplish them, I would brag about myself. Like, I would be like, "Yay, I did that thing." And everybody, like the adults around me, are like, "Oh, you're not being very humble." And I'm like, I wasn't trying to be. Like, I'm really proud that I did this thing that was really hard, even though it might not have been hard for other people. Now I realize it was hard because I was disabled and I was pushing through when other people probably could have had accommodations. Anyway, so when Kamala said that, it just felt so good. I needed to hear a leader say that. But anyway, this video is actually something that my eye doctor said to me. Made, like, on the drive home, I was like thinking about it. And I'm like, I'm going to make a video about this. So it has to do with like slow processing. Because I was beating myself up on the way home for not speaking up or speaking out. But part of it is slow processing, and part of it is, again, the autistic mask. So a lot of times, you hear people say, if you see or hear somebody do something wrong in front of you, say something racist, ableist, sexist, then you should speak up about it. And it got me thinking, it's like, it's not that I don't want to, it's that oftentimes I can't process it fast enough in that moment. And this is one of the things where people get really angry at disabled people for having a disability because part of being autistic often is slow processing. So what my eye doctor said was, yeah, I know it sounds really dumb, but opening up a medicine bottle to take my supplements is just, it was like, oh, one more thing. And it should be easy, but it's not. And so my eye doctor also has ADHD. So what he was saying is basically internalized ableism, where we were talking about how I was struggling to take the eye drops that he's wanting me to take for dry eye. And I was telling him, like, I am just struggling to kind of like put it in my routine. And he was relating to that because he was saying that he also was struggling to take his supplements that he takes for whatever his reasons are. And he was saying like, oh, I know it sounds so dumb, but sometimes just the thought of having to unscrew the bottle is what prevents me from wanting to do it. But that's exactly what ADHD is. Sometimes ADHD is like some simple, like what is simple for other people, a task becomes insurmountable to an ADHD brain. And so to call it dumb is ableist. And in the doctor's office at that moment, I was like relating to him and understanding, like, oh, I hate that frustration too. And later on, I did realize, like, oh, that was actually really ableist, but the moment had passed. Like, I didn't want to call it out then. And so then on the way home, I was thinking about it and it was just really bothering me. One thing I think that, and I could be wrong about this, but I feel like a lot of times people, and I'm talking about like non-disabled people, can sort of wrap their heads around, maybe empathize or sympathize with someone with a physical disability, because they can, like for instance, someone who is blind, you can close your eyes and or put on a mask, and temporarily it's not the same experience, but in your mind you can kind of be like, oh yeah, doing these things if I didn't have eyesight would be very, very hard. They can kind of like put themselves in that scenario because they can temporarily do that. Or like, so if they see somebody with an amputated arm, they can kind of imagine like, oh my gosh, if I had to do everything with one arm, like how, and this one just didn't exist, life would be really difficult. They can often take that leap to a physical disability and understand how difficult it is to have that physical disability. And I could be wrong. There's probably a lot of people who can't make that leap. And it's also kind of very minimizing way to talk about physical disabilities, because temporarily putting a blindfold on is just does not even encompass the entirety of the disability, because a lot of times with a physical disability, there's a mental component too that people struggle with in this systematic ableist society. But, just kind of like even shaving away all of that, I think sometimes people can at least sort of relate to a physical disability way more than they can to a neurological or mental disability. Most people, when they are thinking about things that are actual disabling traits of autism and ADHD, they will say, oh, come on, it's not that hard. Why can't you just do that? And it's like, because it is actually part of the disability. And it does make it more complicated because, like, one ADHD person may not struggle with that, but another ADHD person does. It's so unique that that makes it even harder for the larger population to understand. For instance, I said something about being autistic. I cannot do crowds without getting overstimulated, and then another autistic person will pipe up and say, "Oh man, crowds really actually help me because I need that energy to regulate their nervous system. They like that. That helps their dopamine or something. I don't know." See, because I almost have a hard time relating to something that is so neurologically different from my own experience. So the difference between me and someone who doesn't have a neurological brain difference is that I can at least relate, because I'm like, okay, I don't understand how you can deal with crowds, but I do know that I cannot. So I'm just going to take that leap and understand that, that's not something you struggle with, but you do struggle with maybe something that I find easy. I think the average person who does not have a any type of a neurological neurodivergence, right? Like whether it's autism, ADHD, bipolar, dissociative identity disorder, dyslexia, all of those. It's just so hard for them to wrap their brain around how that thing could be difficult. Okay, I'm trying to remember how I was tying this in to my doctor too. So I don't know. There was a way it related. I wish I could have filmed in the car, because I was like, shh. When you're by yourself and you just start talking, I actually don't think I have an internal monologue, but when I'm in the car by myself, I can just think these things out loud. And it's like, oh, I wish I had the camera on me. It was flowing. Anyway, so the processing delay. So a lot of times for one thing, a lot of times people think that autism is the same thing as having intellectual disability. And a lot of that comes from this processing delay that a lot of us have. And there is a high co-occurring rate of intellectual disabilities and autism, but they are not, intellectual disabilities are not part of the autism diagnosis. And a lot of autistic people are actually extremely very smart. But many of us have processing delays, and part of that is because we're taking in so much input to our brains that it takes longer for that information to go through all the neural pathways before it makes sense to us to be able to then speak about it. Or even like a lot of times with feelings, like a lot of times we will be feeling something and we won't be able to name it until later. Again, because our brains have more connections than an allistic brain. So oftentimes if a doctor, a coworker, a boss, a teacher, somebody on the bus, whatever, says something that is rude, racist, sexist, ableist, something that you would want to call out, and you are autistic. I don't know about ADHD. I know that autism has processing delays. I'm not sure about ADHD. I am, like I've mentioned lots of times, I'm not an expert, and because I am autistic and ADHD, sometimes it's hard to separate out for me which trait goes to which. But I do know that most autistic people have this processing delay. And so if you, come across somebody who is doing these things and you want to speak up, that's something that is an important thing for you. One, it can be hard because in that moment, for instance, at the eye doctor, I'm processing the room, for one thing, with the fluorescent lights, the music that they had pumping in through the speakers, trying to understand what he was trying to tell me about the eye drops. And then he wanted to talk about this other procedure. And then we started talking about supplements, but my brain is still now processing this procedure that he might want to do. And I'm trying to in the background, think about that. And then all of a sudden he says this thing about how dumb is it? And it's not a huge ableist statement. It wouldn't have even had to been a big deal. It could have just been like, hey, because, it was internalized ableism. It almost in a way, make him feel better. Like, hey, guy, dude, that was internalized ableism. ADHD is that. That is the thing. It's not dumb. It's ADHD. It didn't have to be a big deal. It could just be a little sentence, okay, let's move on. But I'm processing so much that in that moment, I just went along with it because one, again, I didn't process that it was ableist until later. And then two, the biggest one is that I had over 40 years of masking my autism, masking my autistic traits. My brain and other people who are late diagnosed literally builds a defense system to keep us, hey Watson, no barking, to keep us safe and not speak out. Don't bring attention to ourselves. Our brain literally developed a system to make us assimilate and be go with the flow for the most part. Again, everyone's mask is different. This is just for a lot of us. So to break past that and break that down and realize, hey, I am safe. I can speak out about things that are important to me, takes a lot of undoing. It's part of the unmasking process. It takes a long time. It's not something you can just do overnight where it's like, oh, yes, my brain used to not let me speak up about these things because I had to be safe, to where now judging, is this a safe space to say something? Or, sometimes speaking out against these racism, sexism, all these things, even if it's something you want to do, you still need to be able to judge your circumstances. Like if I'm on a bus and there's like 5 men around me, I'm probably not going to speak up. I mean, my safety has to come first. And other people with more privilege. So if it was somebody in a male body that heard this, maybe they would feel safer in that same circumstances to speak out. But let's say the circumstances are fairly safe, like with my doctor. Now, that's not one that I'm probably going to go up and follow up with. But what if it's something that you need to correct because if you don't, it's going to affect you going forward? So maybe like with a boss or maybe a professor said something that's going to affect your grade, and it is something that it's important for you to speak out on. Sometimes if you, one thing you got to again, if you're autistic, you got to be situational awareness. Never ever correct your boss in front of other people because they will see that as challenging their authority. Same thing for a professor. But let's say you meet your professor after hours and you just need to clear up something. And one of the things that ableist people will often do is they will say, why are you harping on this? Why didn't you say something right when it happened? And for one thing, it's because I couldn't process it then, and I'm not harping on it. I'm bringing it to your attention because it is important. And it doesn't have to be a big thing, but it is something that I need to address. But I've had that happen to me before where it's hey, I need to talk about this. And they're like, why are you harping? It's harping is a little different than just I need to address this. But that's something that ableist people will use in regards to autistic people just trying to get understanding and more information or clarity or correction around a subject. Because somebody who's not autistic might have been able to process it in the moment and handle it appropriately in that moment. But for a lot of us, we need that extra processing time. And so we have to bring it up later, which means that the other person thinks that we've been spending all this time on it. And we might be thinking about it, but it's because it's time that we needed to process because, takes us a while. All right, well, before I go, if you didn't get a chance to check out my last video, it was on how autistic people can become activists. And I'm worried that the thumbnail just didn't quite get the message across. It's not giving any actual direct things. It's actually talking about activism as a big wide net and showing that there are ways to be an activist that don't dysregulate your nervous system. Most of the time, people think of activists as people who are out there doing loud, big protests. And there's a lot of other ways to be an activist. And I don't know, that video just got way lower views. So, which I was really sad about because I thought it was very timely and I thought a lot of people would be interested in it, but I don't always get these things right. So if it's not an interest to you, that's fine, no worries, but I just don't know if I didn't explain it in the title well enough, which is one of my struggles. Anyway, I will see y'all in the next one. Bye guys.